Albert Camus spent his entire life telling you that life has no meaning. Not as a warning, not as a tragedy, as a liberation. He said the universe owes you nothing. No purpose, no explanation, no reward for your suffering. He said the gods are not watching. He said the silence you hear when you ask the universe why is not a malfunction. It is the answer. And he said that once you truly accept that, once you stop waiting for a meaning that was never coming, something extraordinary becomes possible. 25 centuries before Camus was born, an old Chinese archivist walked to the western gate of a crumbling dynasty, handed a border guard 5,000 characters written on strips of bamboo, and disappeared into the desert. His name was Lao Tzu, and those 5,000 characters said something that sounds, on the surface, almost identical to Camus. Stop striving, stop forcing, stop demanding that reality explain itself to you. But here is where it gets strange. Camus and Lao Tzu arrived at what looks like the same door and walked through it into completely different rooms. One of those rooms leads to revolt. The other leads to something the West has never had a word for. And the difference between them is the most important philosophical question you will face this year. I'm Andrew, and this is Daily Tao Wisdom, where we go back to the source. Not the quotes on Instagram, not the self-help repackaging, the actual stories, the actual figures, the actual wisdom, and what it means for your life right now. By the end of this video, you'll understand why two of history's most honest thinkers looked at the same broken world, and why one of their answers will exhaust you, and the other might finally let you rest. To understand what these two men were fighting, you need to feel the specific weight of the worlds they were born into. Albert Camus was born in Mondovi, Algeria, in 1913. Not the romantic Algiers of travel postcards. The Algiers of French colonial rule, of grinding poverty in the working-class Belcourt neighborhood, of a mother who was partially deaf and could barely speak, of a father who died at the Battle of the Marne when Camus was less than a year old. He grew up in a 3-room apartment with no running water, sharing a bed with his brother, watched over by a grandmother who disciplined with a whip. This is not background detail. This matters, because Camus did not arrive at the question of meaninglessness as a philosopher sitting comfortably in a university office. He arrived at it as a young man who had already seen what the universe does to the innocent, and had decided early that if there was a God arranging things, the arrangement was indecent. He was also brilliant, impossibly brilliant. A scholarship student who devoured Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Augustine. A young man who wanted to be a philosopher, but was blocked from the academic track by tuberculosis. The disease that would haunt him his entire life and eventually contributed to his death at 46 in the wreckage of a car on a French country road. A train ticket to Paris unused in his coat pocket. He published his first major work, The Stranger, in 1942. Nazi-occupied Paris, a city living under the specific terror of arbitrary authority, where innocent people disappeared not because of what they had done, but simply because the machinery of power had decided they were inconvenient. If you wanted a backdrop for a philosophy about an indifferent universe that kills without reason, you could not have written a more precise one. Now travel back, not 46 years, 25 centuries, China, 500 BCE. The Zhou dynasty is collapsing. This was the ancient Chinese equivalent of watching every institution you trusted, your government, your traditions, your social contracts, crack and crumble simultaneously. Warlords were carving the empire into competing kingdoms. Philosophers were being hired and fired by rulers desperate for an ideology that would hold things together. Confucius was traveling from court to court, offering his system of ritual order and social hierarchy, largely being ignored. And somewhere in this chaos, the exact location is disputed. The exact life is disputed. Some scholars argue he may be a composite of multiple figures. An archivist named Lao Tzu was quietly doing his job, cataloging the records of a dynasty that was visibly dying around him. Here is what we know, or what the tradition tells us, which is its own kind of knowing. At some point, Lao Tzu decided to leave. He had watched the collapse long enough. He was going west, into the desert, into whatever came after civilization. A border guard named Yin Shi recognized him and made a request. Before you go, write down what you know. What Lao Tzu wrote in response became the Tao Te Ching, 81 short chapters, 5,000 characters, the most translated book in history after the Bible. Two men, 25 centuries apart, both staring at a world that had stopped making sense, both deciding to write anyway. Chapter 1. The Diagnosis. What is actually wrong? Before we can understand what Camus and Lao Tzu prescribed, we need to understand what they each diagnosed, because they agreed on the symptom. They disagreed profoundly on the disease. Camus called the symptom the absurd, not absurdity in the comedic sense. The absurd as a specific philosophical condition, the collision between the human need for clarity, meaning, and purpose, and the universe's complete and total silence in response to that need. You want to know why you are here. The universe says nothing. You want to know if your suffering means something. The universe says nothing. You want to know if the good are rewarded and the evil punished. The universe says nothing. This collision, this gap, this unbridgeable space between what humans desperately need and what reality provides, that is the absurd. And Camus argued it is not going away. You cannot resolve it through religion, because religion requires a leap of faith that Camus considered a form of philosophical suicide, choosing comfort over truth. You cannot resolve it through nihilism, by deciding nothing matters, because Camus thought that was just the absurd wearing a different costume, still letting the silence win. The only honest response, Camus argued, is to look the absurd directly in the face and revolt. Keep this word. We will need it. Now, Lao Tzu's diagnosis. Lao Tzu looked at the same suffering human, the person striving, searching, demanding explanation, collapsing under the weight of a world that doesn't cooperate, and identified a different disease entirely. Not the collision between human need and universal silence. The disease, for Lao Tzu, was the need itself. Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching, return to the root, the 10,000 things, every leaf, every empire, every human ambition arise from the Tao and return to it. The problem is not that the universe is silent. The problem is that you decided the universe should be speaking to you in the first place. This is subtle. It is easy to miss, and it changes everything. Camus says, the universe is silent, and that silence is a wound we must live with heroically. Lao Tzu says, you were never supposed to be waiting for the universe to speak. One diagnosis leads to rebellion. The other leads to something quieter, and, Lao Tzu would argue, far more powerful. Chapter 2. Sisyphus and the Stone, the myth that divides them. In 1942, the same year Camus published The Stranger, he published a philosophical essay that contains the most famous sentence he ever wrote. the myth of Sisyphus. You know the story. Sisyphus, punished by the gods for his defiance, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Every time he reaches the top, the boulder rolls back down. He descends. He begins again. Forever. The gods designed this punishment to be the worst possible fate. Not death, not physical pain, but meaningless, endless, futile labor. And Camus looks at Sisyphus at the bottom of the hill, the boulder back at his feet, the summit above him again, the whole cycle beginning again, and writes the sentence that made him famous. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. This is not a joke. This is not irony. Camus meant it completely. Sisyphus is happy because he has looked at the full truth of his situation, the gods, the boulder, the eternity of futile labor, and refused to be destroyed by it. He knows exactly what his fate is. He has no illusions, no hope of rescue, no prayer that tomorrow might be different. And in that total, clear-eyed acknowledgement of the absurd, in that refusal to either surrender to despair or escape into false hope, Camus found a form of freedom. The revolt is the happiness. The defiance is the meaning. Here is what Lao Tzu would say about Sisyphus. He would not tell him to revolt. He would ask him one question. Why are you still pushing the boulder? This might sound flippant. It is not. Lao Tzu would look at Sisyphus, not at his punishment, but at his psychology, and identify the root of the suffering not in the boulder, or the gods, or the hill, but in the part of Sisyphus that keeps deciding the boulder must reach the top. Chapter 78 of the Tao Te Ching. Nothing in the world is as soft and yielding as water, yet for dissolving the hard and inflexible, nothing can surpass it. The water does not revolt against the stone. It does not defy the stone. It simply, without force, without anger, without heroic effort, flows around it, and the stone, over time, disappears. Camus asks Sisyphus to find dignity in the pushing. Lao Tzu asks Sisyphus to question whether the pushing was ever the point. This is not a small disagreement. This is the fork in the road where Western philosophy and Taoist philosophy have been standing, staring at each other, for 2,500 years. Chapter 3. The Rebel and Wu Wei. 2 ways to respond to a world that won't cooperate. In 1951, Camus published The Rebel, his most explicitly political work, and the book that ended his friendship with Jean-Paul Sartre in one of the most famous intellectual breakups of the 20th century. The argument of The Rebel is this: once you accept the absurd, once you accept that there is no divine order, no guaranteed meaning, you face a choice. You can conclude that therefore anything is permitted, that without God, without cosmic justice, without objective meaning, there are no real moral constraints, and history is just power, wearing different masks. Camus rejected this completely. His answer was revolt, not nihilistic freedom, but the specific, bounded human act of refusing injustice, even in a universe that doesn't care about justice. You rebel not because the universe will reward you for it. You rebel because you are human, and humans, even in an indifferent universe, can choose to stand on the side of the living. This is genuinely admirable. There is a reason Camus won the Nobel Prize. There is a reason his books are still in print. He was trying to build a moral framework for the modern world that didn't require God, didn't collapse into nihilism, and still gave human beings a reason to fight for each other. But here is what it costs. The Camusian life is, by design, exhausting. You are perpetually in revolt. The absurd never resolves. The boulder never stays at the top. Every generation must push it again. Every individual must find their own defiance, their own reason to keep going in the face of silence. The dignity is real, the freedom is real, but it requires a constant, active, effortful maintenance, the philosophical equivalent of treading water. You have felt this, not necessarily as philosophy, but as the specific exhaustion of a person who is very good at managing, coping, strategizing, and pushing through, who handles everything, who never stops, who would describe themselves as resilient and means it as a compliment, but sometimes, quietly, privately, wonders what it would feel like to not have to be. Lao Tzu's answer to the world that won't cooperate is not revolt. It is Wu Wei. In our video, The True Story of Wu Wei, told by the man who refused to act, we trace this concept back to its actual historical roots, beyond the oversimplified do-nothing translation that strips it of all its power. Wu Wei is not passivity. It is not surrender. It is not giving up. Wu Wei is action that is so perfectly aligned with the nature of a situation that it requires no force to execute. The master archer in Zhuangzi's story doesn't fight the wind. He reads it. The cook in chapter 3 of Zhuangzi doesn't hack through the ox. He finds the spaces that already exist between the joints, and his knife passes through without resistance. The water doesn't revolt against the mountain. It finds the path that was always there. Here is the crucial distinction Camus and Lao Tzu would die on. Camus says the world is broken, and your job is to fight it anyway. Lao Tzu says your belief that the world is broken is itself the wound, and Wu Wei is the practice of releasing that belief in favor of something more accurate. This is not optimism. Lao Tzu was not an optimist. He watched a dynasty collapse. He saw exactly what humans do to each other when they are convinced the world owes them something. Chapter 17 of the Tao Te Ching describes the worst kind of ruler as the one the people despise. A ruler who rules through force and fear because he cannot rule through presence. Lao Tzu knew about the capacity of the world to be brutal. He was not naive about it. What he was saying is something more radical than Camus. The suffering is real, and the framework through which you are experiencing it is optional. Chapter 4. The Stranger and the Uncarved Block. Two different humans. Camus' most famous character, Meursault, the narrator of The Stranger, is a man who feels almost nothing. His mother dies. He does not weep at her funeral. He goes to the beach the next day. He gets into a conflict that ends with him shooting an Arab man on a beach in the Algerian sun. At his trial, the prosecution is more scandalized by his emotional indifference than by the killing. He is condemned not for the murder, but for his failure to perform the expected grief, the expected remorse, the expected emotional script. Camus intended Meursault as a kind of saint, a man so stripped of social performance, so genuinely indifferent to the theater of human expectation, that he arrives at a brutal, naked honesty about existence. Before his execution, Meursault opens himself to the gentle indifference of the world and finds something like peace in it. Now, Lao Tzu's ideal human. Pu, the uncarved block. Not a man stripped of emotion. A person who has not yet been carved by society's demand that they be something specific. The uncarved block contains all possibilities, not because it has thrown them all away, but because it hasn't yet been forced to choose one at the expense of all others. Here is the difference. Meursault's freedom comes from subtraction. He has removed himself from the human contract, the expectations, the performances, the meanings. He is free because he is taken away. The uncarved block's freedom comes from wholeness. It is not missing anything. It has simply not been forced into a shape that isn't its own. This is, if you look at it carefully, a completely different understanding of what a human being actually is. Camus, formed by Western philosophy, sees the self as fundamentally separate, an individual consciousness confronting an alien universe, finding meaning through defiance of that separation. Lao Tzu sees the self as fundamentally continuous, not separate from the Tao, not confronting it, but made of it. The 10,000 things arise from the Tao and return to it. You are not Sisyphus looking up at the hill. You are, in some way, Lao Tzu considered too important to explain simply, the hill and the boulder and the man pushing it and the force of gravity and the space between them. This is where Western philosophy tends to stop reading and put the book down. Because if there is no separation between self and world, there is nothing to revolt against. And if there is nothing to revolt against, then Camus' entire framework, brave and beautiful as it is solving the wrong problem. Chapter 5. Algeria and the Tao. What both men got right. Let's be careful here, because this is where these kinds of philosophical comparison videos often make a mistake, crowning one thinker the winner and dismissing the other. Camus was right about something Lao Tzu's framework can sometimes obscure. The world is, in specific, concrete, documented ways, unjust. Children are born into poverty they did not choose. Political violence is real. Colonialism was real. The Arab man Meursault shot on the beach was real, in the sense that Algerian men were being killed by European settlers in exactly that casual, consequence-free way throughout Camus' lifetime. Camus, to his enormous credit, knew this and agonized over it in a way his existentialist contemporaries often didn't. There is a real danger in a certain misreading of Lao Tzu that turns Wu Wei into a philosophy for the comfortable, a way of telling the oppressed to flow like water while the powerful continue to carve the channels. Lao Tzu himself was not advocating for that, but the misreading is available, and it is worth naming. Camus' insistence on revolt, on the specific human act of refusing to accept that injustice is simply the nature of things, is not something that Taoist philosophy can cleanly absorb. The rebel is doing something Lao Tzu was not trying to do, and doing it with full moral seriousness. But Lao Tzu was right about something Camus, despite all his brilliance, never fully solved. If the absurd is permanent, if the revolt must be maintained forever, if there is no resolution, only the dignity of the ongoing fight, then what is the actual texture of a life lived fully inside that framework? What does Tuesday morning feel like? What does it feel like at 4 a.m. when the revolt is hard and the defiance is low, and you are just a person who is tired? Camus died at 46. His biographers note that in his later years he was struggling with his public image, with Algeria, with the endless intellectual battles that exhausted rather than energized him. The man who told Sisyphus to be happy was not always happy, not because he was a hypocrite, because the framework, for all its nobility, leaves something unaddressed. Chapter 16 of the Tao Te Ching. Returning to the root is called stillness. Stillness is called returning to one's destiny. This is not the stillness of defeat. This is not the quiet of a person who has stopped caring. It is the stillness of a person who has found something underneath the noise, something that was there before the striving began and will be there after the last revolt has ended. The question Lao Tzu is asking, and that Camus never quite reached, is not how do you keep going in the face of meaninglessness. It is, what if you stopped needing meaning to keep going? Chapter 6. The Conversation. They never had imagined for a moment that these two men could meet. Not in a debate, not in a symposium, just two people somewhere quiet. Camus with his cigarette, Lao Tzu with his silence. Camus would say, "The world is not what it should be. People suffer who should not suffer." And the honest response to that is to not look away, to remain in the discomfort of the absurd, to revolt against injustice, even knowing the universe will never reward you for it. There is a human dignity in that, a solidarity, a refusal to be consoled by comfortable lies. Lao Tzu would listen. He would probably nod, and then he would say something like this, not in an argument because Lao Tzu didn't argue, but as a simple observation. You are carrying the world's weight in order to be worthy of it. But the world did not ask you to carry it. The Tao does not need your revolt. The 10,000 things will rise and fall, whether you push against them or not. What would you be? Who would you be if you put the weight down? Not to abandon justice, not to stop caring, but to act from stillness rather than from resistance. Chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching. The highest good is like water. Water gives life to the 10,000 things and does not strive. Camus would push back. Of course he would. He would say that stillness is a luxury. Tell it to the workers in the Algerian mines. Tell it to the people being loaded onto trains. And Lao Tzu would say, gently, without heat, I am not telling them anything. I am asking you, what is the quality of your own revolt? Is it coming from strength or from wound? Because a revolt that comes from wound will wound everything it touches. This is, if you sit with it, a genuinely uncomfortable question. Not because Camus was wrong to revolt, but because the question of why you revolt and what is actually fueling it, whether it is clarity or anger, whether it is love or exhaustion, that question does not go away just because the cause is just. Here is where both of these men are talking about your actual life, not abstractly, right now. Most people in the modern world are living something close to the Camusian position, without the philosophy to name it. You have accepted, at some level, that the universe does not have a plan for you. That meaning is not delivered. It is constructed. That you are responsible for your own life and that no external authority is coming to validate or rescue you. This is the post-religious, post-traditional Western position that most educated people in 2026 hold, whether they articulate it this way or not. And so you revolt, you optimize, you set goals and pursue them. You do the therapy and the journaling and the shadow work. You try to be conscious and present and intentional. You push the boulder. And you are, let's be honest about this, exhausted. Not because you are weak, not because the goals are wrong, but because the framework requires the exhaustion. The Camusian dignity is inseparable from the effort. The moment you stop pushing, you lose the thing that makes Sisyphus happy. So you cannot stop, so you do not stop. Lao Tzu is not offering you a reason to stop caring. He is not offering you permission to abandon your responsibilities, or your relationships, or your work. He is asking you one question, the same question he asked every student, every ruler, every person who came to him carrying the weight of a life that felt too heavy. What are you actually resisting right now? Not in the political sense, in the daily sense, the conversation you keep rehearsing in your head. The situation at work that you keep mentally fighting even when you are not there. The version of yourself you keep insisting you should be, but aren't yet. the relationship you keep trying to fix by pushing harder at it. Chapter 22 of the Tao Te Ching, Yield and Overcome. Bend and be straight. This is not advice. It is an observation about how reality actually functions, which is that force applied to a resistant situation rarely produces what the force was designed to produce. Water does not yield to the stone as a strategy. It yields because it is water, and the stone changes, not immediately, not dramatically, not in a way anyone announces, but the stone always, eventually, changes. Here is the practical version of what Lao Tzu is pointing at. There is a version of you that is capable of acting with full seriousness, full commitment, full engagement with the real problems of your life, without the internal war, without the resistance, without the part that is simultaneously doing the thing and judging whether you are doing it well enough and catastrophizing what will happen if you don't do it well enough. Camus would call this wishful thinking. Lao Tzu would call it the beginning of the practice. The practice, and this is the part no philosophy video will tell you because it doesn't make a good sentence, is extraordinarily difficult. Harder than revolt in some ways, because revolt has a clear direction and a clear enemy. The Taoist practice has neither. You are trying to find a relationship with reality that is not defined by what you are fighting against. And in a culture that has decided your value is determined by what you produce and overcome, that is a radical reorientation. But here is what it offers that Camus, for all his brilliance, could not: rest. Not the rest of a person who has given up. The rest of a person who has found something underneath the striving that does not need the striving to exist. That is what Lao Tzu was pointing at when he handed those 5,000 characters to a border guard and walked into the desert. Not a philosophy to argue about, a direction to walk in. If this is landing, if you've been living the Camusian position without the language for it, and something in this video is naming something real, hit subscribe. We go deep on these forgotten intersections every week, and drop a comment with this. Which are you more, the person who keeps pushing the boulder because the pushing itself has become the meaning, or the person who secretly suspects the boulder was optional all along? I'm genuinely curious. The comments on these videos are some of the best philosophical conversations on YouTube, and that is entirely because of who you are, not because of anything I did. We began with 2 men, 2 doors, 2 different rooms. Camus standing at the bottom of the hill, looking up at the boulder, choosing to push, and finding his dignity in that choice. Lao Tzu walking through a gate in a crumbling wall, handing 5,000 words to a stranger, and disappearing into whatever comes after civilization. Both of them honest, both of them serious, both of them, in their own completely different ways, trying to answer the same question that you are living right now. How do you move through a world that will not cooperate with what you need it to be? Camus says, you push, you rebel, you refuse to be broken, and there is genuine nobility in that. When the world is being actively unjust, when people are suffering in ways that demand a response, the Camusian position is not wrong. It is necessary. We need people who will push. But Lao Tzu is asking whether pushing is all there is, whether underneath the revolt there is something older, something that was operating before you learned to resist, before the world taught you that effort was the price of worthiness, that does not need a boulder or a hill or even a destination. Here is this week's practical challenge. Not a mindset shift, not a journaling prompt. One concrete thing. Find one situation in your life, just one, where you have been applying force that isn't working. Not a situation where effort is wrong. A specific place where you have been pushing and the thing is not moving, and you have been pushing harder in response. Don't fix it this week. Just watch it. Watch yourself wanting to push. Watch what happens in your body when you just consider what it might mean to stop. You don't have to have an answer. The watching is the beginning. If this conversation is landing, if you're finding that these two voices are saying something you've been circling for a while, then you belong here. Subscribe and come back next week. Because the next figure we're going to sit with took everything Camus said about revolt and everything Lao Tzu said about stillness and tried for his entire life to hold both at the same time. And the story of how that turned out is one of the most important stories I've found in 3 years of making this channel. The water doesn't ask where it's going. This is Andrew from Daily Tao Wisdom. The rest is yours.